The GMTK Game Jam is back and bigger than ever. This year, participants had 96 hours to make a full, complete game, and with over 7,500 games submitted, it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, game jam of all time. And one of those games, well, one of those games is mine. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of my first game jam ever, my experiences, and what I learned. Let's go! So this year's theme for the game jam was built to scale, which, honestly, is a pretty damn good theme. There's a ton of room for interpretation. You could do making things bigger and smaller, climbing, reptiles and fish, having things increase in scope, lots of mechanical and technology stuff, and, of course, building. When I first looked at the theme, I had a lot of ideas running through my head, but it took me almost the whole first day to decide what I wanted to do. But I did finally settle on an idea, and that idea was, what if Factory Builder, but with music? Let me explain. You've got a tile-based grid on which you can place buildings with the goal of producing music. I wanted to do something with musical scales because I felt like that was a take on the theme that not a whole lot of people would do. And since I first heard the theme, I kinda wanted to do a Factory Builder game, so I thought, why not combine the two? Rhythm games as a genre have a lot of untapped potential, I feel. Most of the games out there just make you click a button at the right time. Making puzzles about trying to create certain scales or rhythms by placing down buildings sounded pretty fun, and different from the status quo. This is FactoRHYTHM, my game that I submitted to the jam. I explained some of it earlier, but this is a complete, in-depth explanation of its mechanics. In FactoRHYTHM, everything happens on beats. If you're a musician, you're familiar with that term, but if you aren't, a beat is a unit of time used in music. A beat can be further divided than I have, but in FactoRHYTHM, everything happens either on the beat or between two beats, on the offbeat. Beats are grouped into groups of 4 beats, also known as a measure. The objective of the game is to recreate a measure-long music sample using the provided buildings. This is an instrument, the thing your factory produces. It's not a building, but it is building adjacent. They would ideally come in many different sound types, but within the jam time limit, I only got around to snare drums and kick drums. Your goal is to get the instruments from the noisemakers to the speakers using the different conveyors. The noisemakers produce one instrument on the conveyor in front of them every onbeat, if there isn't already an instrument there. The speakers accept instrument input from all sides and play the instrument's sound when an instrument gets to them. They are placed in the level on load and cannot be moved by the player. Conveyors are used to transport instruments from the noisemakers to the speakers, and come in many different flavors. Basic conveyors send any instruments on top of them forward after one full beat of delay. Corner conveyors do the same thing, except they send the instrument to their side instead of straight forward. Splitter conveyors alternate between sending instruments left and right, and double speed conveyors are special. They only take half the time to transport instruments, having only half a beat of delay. This means they can transfer instruments from moving on beats to moving on off beats, and vice versa, which opens up a whole world of possibilities for new rhythms. Phew! It's a lot of stuff. As the game progresses, the beats get more and more complex, ending with this monster of a beat. I'm explaining the game because I want to talk about all my experience with Jam and what it took to get here. I've never made a full game before, let alone in 4 days, so it was pretty tough getting everything done in time. Scope was probably one of my biggest problems. I had a ton of other ideas and even fully implemented mechanics I had to scrap because I ran out of time. For instance, I wouldn't have more than just percussion instruments, marimbas, saxophones, the whole orchestra. But I couldn't really figure out how to make it fun for players to listen for and change the pitch of those instruments to make a song. Just take a listen. Can you tell how far apart these pitches are? If you're 99% of people, you probably said no, and I'd be right there with you. The average person is just too bad at telling pitches apart, including me, So a game where you have to do that over and over again really just wouldn't be very fun. So that got scrapped. I also wanted to have levels that separate beats into 3 parts instead of 2, and have blockers placed around the level that stop you from placing buildings there. But in the end, I just ran out of time. I guess you could say I had to scale back how built my game was. My favorite part of making FactoRHYTHM hands down was definitely the art and sound design. Don't get me wrong, programming everything and getting the main mechanics to work was super fun and satisfying, but taking my game from looking and sounding like a baby's first tech demo to a funky synthwave paradise felt so good. Scope was a problem here again for sure though. I wanted to make custom music that actually fit with all the drum loops you're supposed to manufacture, but I ran out of time for that, so I just had to drop in some MacLeod stuff. Not great, but honestly some of his music is way more funky than you would think. I even got a couple compliments about the music, which is hilarious because it's not even mine. Still, making the art and sound effects look as nice as possible was a fun little challenge, and I would do it again. By far, the hardest part of making the game was level design. Not that the levels were hard to make or anything, but trying to get a smooth and balanced difficulty curve was, well, difficult. I think I did an okay job overall. In the first level, you start with only 2 possible buildings, noisemakers and conveyors, and the starting rhythm couldn't be simpler, just constant snare drum hits. I feel like it would be difficult to get stuck on this one. Level 2 introduces the splitters, corners, and muters all at once, and it asks the player to play snare drum hits on beats 2 and 4. What you're meant to do is split the line of instruments immediately and send one side to the goal and the other side into a muter. This shouldn't be a big spike in difficulty, but I have seen some people get stuck here, mostly people who don't have a great sense of rhythm. Level 3 is where the curve starts to fall apart. This is the level that introduces the double speed conveyor, and the rhythm requires you to place beats on the off beats of 1 and 3 and the on beats of 2 and 4. This is pretty much double the difficulty of the previous level, and from the feedback I've gotten, it's difficult for people who are less musically inclined to tell the difference between this and this. The other 5 levels are a much smoother ride in terms of difficulty ramping, but those first 3 levels, and especially level 3, are quite a bit of a roadblock for new players. After the jam came the rating period, when we got to play what everyone else made and exchange feedback. I spent basically all my free time playing other people's games, and there's some real gems in here. I'm probably going to make my own top 10 list out of all the games I played, so keep on the lookout for that sometime soon. I got to 56 games rated, but some madmen and women out there got to over 100. I don't even know how you get that much free time, to be honest. The final rankings came out while I was writing this, so I need to rewrite this whole part. Let's see. I got 838th place. You know, that's not bad. Top 600 in creativity, very nice. Those style and enjoyment ratings could use some work though, sheesh. Overall though, about what I expected. The feedback is a little more interesting. I think how much fun you have with the game depends heavily on how musically inclined you are. People with less experience in music tend to get stuck on level 2 or 3, with no idea what they're doing wrong. By contrast, people with a bunch of experience in music breeze through the game, and find the final few levels a bit more repetitive. This is going to be difficult to fix, but it's probably a good idea to add some accessibility options to make the game's difficulty a little more customizable. Anyway, congratulations to all the devs who scored high, and everyone look out for GameMaker's Toolkits video on his top 20 games of the jam, if it isn't out already. Alright, final thoughts on the jam. I had fun, and I seriously recommend anyone looking to get into game development to go join some game jams. I went from being an outsider in the game dev community to one of the boys, and now I have people I can talk to if I need help or feedback. The Brackies Game Jam is coming up in a few weeks, so if you're curious, go join that. I don't have time for it this year, but it seems like a pretty good one, and I would join if I could. I'm also very happy with the game I managed to make, and I'm going to keep working on it to maybe get it into a state where I can sell it as a full game. If you submitted a game to the GMTK Game Jam, leave the game's name and your itch.io profile name in the comments, and I'll play it and leave you some feedback. Expect to see my top 10 games of the GMTK Game Jam 2024 ranking video, and a couple devlogs about FactoRHYTHM in the near future. My name is Gvon, and the game dev community is actually really welcoming. Wow. I mean, I don't think I ran into a single toxic person throughout the whole jam, and I must have seen hundreds of comments and messages at least. It's a nice break from some of the fandoms I've been stuck in the past, and it's a nice perk of the hobby.